Welcome to the testifiers table. Co-Chair Fisher, would you like to move House File 3007 before the committee?
Thank you. I'd like to move House File 3007 to be laid over for a possible inclusion in a future bill.
Excellent. Would you also at this time like to move your A2 authors amendment?
Yes, I would like to move the A2 authors amendment. There's a couple of things that are happening. Is first of all, the first part of the amendment, lines 1.1 through 1.15. This is technical assistance that I received from the DNR addressing the base underlying bill of House File 3007. And then the second part is of the amendment, lines 1.16 through actually goes down to 2.10. This is to create a water atlas to help guide large water users in the state going forward. So this is what I would like to have to get my bill into shape.
Excellent. So Chair Fisher moves the A2 amendment to get the bill in the form that he would like. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The A2 amendment is adopted. Chair Fisher, to your bill as amended.
Yes, thank you, Chair Purcell. Committee, appreciate the opportunity to present House File 3007. This does several different things. Number one, it's putting forward a pre-application evaluation for large water appropriation users. We are seeing more and more situations where we're having businesses coming into the state or within the state wanting to appropriate large uses of water. And so what we're trying to do is provide some definitions and clarity as we're dealing with these issues going forward. It also wants to make sure that we're crafting the permit conditions for large water users and also addressing the issue where we've got data centers involved with this situation. And then finally, the part that we just added on is one of the things that I've heard anecdotally from people and some frustration sometimes from people in different agencies is that they've had businesses coming into the state and start siting in different communities and then find out a little bit later into the process that the amount of water they may need is not available. As we heard earlier, there's parts of our state where we don't have large amounts of water. And if we've got large water users coming in, it'd be great to have some kind of atlas to give them a general idea, not specific, but general idea what parts of the state you should be looking at or not looking at. So it's something that's a work in process out there. I know that the DNR has some feedback that I'm looking at incorporating in. And so with that, I do know that there are a number of testifiers.
There are indeed. Thank you, Chair Fisher. Testifiers, we have a decent number of testifiers. Our first on the list is Sarah Meridian from CURE, and on deck is Darren Broughton from Minnesota Agri-Growth. If you're able to please keep your comments to about a minute and a half, or I will ask you to wrap it up. Thank you. Please introduce yourself to the committee and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Purcell, Chair Fisher, committee members. My name is Sarah Meridian, and I'm the Government Relations and Policy Director for CURE. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of House File 3007 as amended today. In the interest of time, please refer to our written testimony for our complete comments on the bill. Minnesota finds itself facing sudden and intense interest from companies seeking to build hyperscale data centers throughout the state. But our understanding of the cumulative and long-term impacts of the development of this industry on our water, land, energy systems, and communities lags far behind. Clearly, Minnesota needs to address if and how we want data centers to be built and operate in our state. House File 3007 provides a starting point from which Minnesotans can have those essential conversations. This committee has already considered and passed a bill written by Amazon Data Services for an exemption from the Certificate of Need process before our state has had any chance to fully understand just what we're being asked to give away. Now, House File 3007 gives you the opportunity to act in your constituents' best interests and allow Minnesotans to drive the needed conversations about data centers instead of some of the most powerful and wealthy for-profit corporations in the world. We ask for your support of House File 3007. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for keeping under time. Next is Darren Broughton, and our next two testifiers after that will be Andrew Morley and Michelle Benson. Welcome to the committee, and please state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. Darren Broughton, Executive Director of Minnesota Agri-Growth. I want to thank Chair Fisher for bringing forward House File 3008. It is essential that we protect Minnesota's groundwater supply. And while House File 3008's primary goal is to address groundwater usage for proposed data centers, the proposed 100 million gallon threshold also impacts Minnesota's agriculture industry. As the state is looking to attract sustainable aviation fuel facilities to reduce the carbon footprint of the airline industry, those facilities would use more than 100 million gallons a year. Likewise, medium and large dairy farms in the state also reach that threshold, and it is through that lens that AgriGrowth views House File 3008. If the intent of the legislation is to streamline the DNR's water appropriation process, AgriGrowth is interested in this conversation. Subdivision 5G provides new assurances to project proposers that initial conversations with the DNR and other state agencies are confidential. This is important because it allows the agencies and project proposers to discuss specific water quantity needs before a site is selected and an application is submitted. Today, many project proposers are reluctant to have those early conversations, knowing that those conversations are not protected. AgriGrowth expects these conversations to streamline the DNR's permitting process.
If you are able to wrap up your comments, please.
Yep. I also just want to appreciate the provisions in there about water conservation measures and technology. Many of our large dairies have already incorporated water conservation measures that have reduced water usage by 20 or 30%. And right now, the DNR, there's a general feeling that the DNR discounts those measures, so we appreciate those pieces. Lastly, I just want to raise one significant concern on line 3.6. It's a provision that gives the DNR new ambiguous authority to deny a water appropriation permit because it's not in the public's interest. Project proposers need clear rules and guidance when investing in a project that needs a government permit. That language does not provide that clarity.
Thank you, Mr. Broughton.
Thank you.
And our next testifiers, Andrew Morley and Michelle Benson. Please identify yourselves for the committee. As you're from the same organization, please keep your testimony to 1.5 minutes.
Sure.
Welcome.
Co-Chair Fisher, Co-Chair Heinzman, my name is Andrew Morley, and I'm singing a duet today with my colleague Michelle Benson on HF3007. We're on a team that represents the Chamber's more than 6,300 businesses and their more than 500,000 employees. Section 1 includes vague and unenforceable language that would increase complexity and uncertainty in state permitting that we're working to improve on. For example, applicants could be subject to an endless loop of submitting and resubmitting additional information, whether or not it's material for permit approval. The bill encourages, quote, encourages applicants to discuss the project with the commissioner and requires city or county employees to notify the commissioner of any potential applicant contact. This requirement would be challenging from a notification, compliance, and enforcement standpoint. We also are concerned with requiring an environmental impact statement as a blanket review for any project meeting these conditions. The agency should undergo a rulemaking to see if these projects should be added to mandatory category EISs to maximize public input. We respectfully suggest further legislative debate and consideration before moving the proposal forward. Thank you, Co-Chair Fisher, and I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you. Michelle Benson, Energy Policy Director for the Minnesota Chamber. Data centers will be critical infrastructure for the innovative technologies of the future, and innovation has been a hallmark of Minnesota companies for decades. Prior to 2013, Minnesota GDP growth outpaced national GDP growth. But since 2013, we have lagged the country in GDP growth. We now rank 40th of 50 states. Owners' permitting burdens will contribute to a lagging economy. Increased regulatory burdens will slow the growth of innovation in the state. In this committee, we ask you to debate the balance of economic growth and protection of the environment. Data centers will contribute to our tax base and our economic growth.
Please
but they are
conclude your
also
comments, Ms.
stewards-
Benson.
Thank you. They are also working to be good stewards of the environment. We believe that the provisions in House File 3007 will give data center investors a reason to look elsewhere. We ask that you further debate these issues in light of the changes rapidly happening in the data center industry. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up is Julia Nerbonin. I'm sorry, you'll have to correct my pronunciation, followed by Patty O'Keefe. Please state your name for the record. Welcome to the committee. Please attempt to keep your comments to about 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Nerbin, and thank you for having me, Chair Fisher and members of the committee. So my name is Julia Nerbin, and I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, where we work with faith communities across the state to promote climate solutions that are both equitable and effective. And I'm here to express our support for House File 3007. We think it represents an important step towards greater precautions, planning, and community engagement in data center development in Minnesota. Since 2011, when initial legislation regarding data centers was passed, the resource intensity of data centers, their land, their water, their energy use, et cetera, as well as the burdens that they pose to their communities has grown significantly. We're in a very different world today than we were in 2011. So we have concerns. You've heard these before. We're concerned about lack of transparency about the projects with the communities that will host them. We're concerned about water and energy use. We're concerned about inappropriate zoning and community impact. And we're particularly concerned about tax incentives. The cost to taxpayers has grown significantly since 2011 when these data centers were much smaller. And we know that these tech companies that are proposing to build these data centers are among the richest in the world. So it is right that we use this moment to evaluate how data centers can operate as good neighbors, both now and in the future. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Nurbinen. And our next testifier, please identify yourself. And next up after Ms. O'Keefe will be Erin Klemps.
Hello, chairs and committee members. My name is Patty O'Keefe. I'm the Midwest Regional Director with Vote Solar. Thank you to Chair Fisher for introducing this bill. The United Nations projects a 40% global freshwater shortage by 2030 if current usage patterns continue. U.S. water demand is expected to rise due to population growth, agriculture, and industry, especially in arid regions. The western U.S. alone could see a 20 to 30% reduction in water availability by 2050. Data centers rely on water-intensive cooling systems that consume millions of gallons of drinking water each year. A single data center can consume up to 5 million gallons of water per day, and they are increasing their need for fresh water over time. Microsoft's water consumption increased by 34% between 2021 and 22. Google's water consumption went up nearly 22% over the same period to 5.56 billion gallons per year. Based on these realities, we believe the provisions in this bill are common sense. And while we frankly consider this a floor for water protection from data centers, it's a relief to advocates like us who have until now been concerned about the lack of substantive conversation about guardrails. We support this legislation, but urge stronger protections for Minnesota's water. Data centers should be prohibited from using groundwater, and closed-loop water systems must be required. Public transparency is critical. Each project's siting data should be public, and communities must have a say in water use decisions. Water efficiency measures should be mandatory, not optional, and aquifer testing must be required in permitting. You might think this is a lot to ask of companies, but these are the richest corporations in the world building these data centers. We think it's fair to expect that if they plan to do this, they do it responsibly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. O'Keefe. Next up, Erin Klemps, and then followed by the last speaker on my list is Katie Smith. Please state your name for the record, welcome to the committee, and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Fisher, Chair Heinzman, and members of the committee. My name is Erin Klemps. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, or MCEA. We're a public interest law firm and an advocacy organization with over 50 years of experience defending Minnesota's environment and the health of its people. We support HF3007 and thank Representative Fisher for his work on this bill. This bill is a good first step toward comprehensively addressing the downsides to people and the environment from an explosion of data center development interest in Minnesota. MCA particularly appreciates the enhanced environmental review requirements for hyperscale data centers, the attention to data center electricity consumption, and movement toward accountability in water consumption. HF3007 is a welcome step toward a balanced approach to data centers in state law. So far this legislative session, bills have been heard on data centers that have been giving them faster and easier tax breaks, exempting data centers from our environmental laws, and this bill is a refreshing change from that trend. We do think this language could be strengthened. The advance notice and early consideration of siting with regard to water resources is good, although we think that it should be mandatory instead of encouraged. We also know that because so many of these data center proposals piggyback on existing municipal water permits, that's a way to avoid existing statutory requirements to look at the sustainability of the use, look at environmental review and other sorts of laws that already exist in statute. So it's not about putting new standards in place, but really ensuring the ones that are already in statute apply. Lastly, we want to put out the oar here for requiring reporting of metals used in construction and operation. because the landfilling of metals-intensive servers every few years means that we're going to adding more and more to the e-waste problem in Minnesota, and addressing inappropriate site next to residential communities should be addressed and included in a more comprehensive and balanced approach to data centers in Minnesota. Thank you for your work on HF3007, Representative Fisher, and we urge the legislature to move toward a balanced approach to looking at both the upsides and downsides of data center development in Minnesota this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clems. And finally, Katie Smith, please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Madam Chair, members, Katie Smith, Director of the Ecological and Water Resources Division at Minnesota DNR. I want to first focus on Section 1. Water is not distributed equally across Minnesota. A project proposer may unknowingly choose a location with water availability or sustainability concerns. These concerns need to be considered early in the process of any water use project, especially before the design is complete, the site is selected, and land is acquired. The DNR is sometimes not aware of a potential water-intensive project until a permit application or amendment is submitted. Typically, this is problematic time for all involved to learn there may be significant water supply challenges because adjustments to project design or challenges with project viability can be expensive and often impact project timelines. The DNR's experience has been that early coordination to discuss water availability in a proposed project location is helpful to avoid these situations and ensure project proposers are aware of any concerns or information needs. We believe the proposed language adds value for companies, communities, and the DNR. Next, I want to move to Section 4 in the amendment regarding water availability atlas. The DNR has identified potential limitations of such an atlas. It would not be able to predict water availability at the scale of an individual site. We also want to urge caution that any sort of map that characterizes availability of water should not be used to cite wells. Maps of this sort are general in nature and do not imply that an aquifer capable of producing water exists in an exact location. County-scale geologic and groundwater atlases are still being completed for large portions of the state, and atlases for some counties are also actively being updated. After that work is completed, periodic updates to the statewide atlas would be needed to reflect new information and understanding. The atlas could be overly broad, especially in areas that do not have a completed hydrologic atlas, potentially leading to misinterpretation. The U.S. Geological Survey has already completed water availability studies and represented the information at a large watershed scale in some parts of the state. More work is needed to determine how those existing studies could be tapped to create a statewide atlas. The siting methodology would need to consider how much water is needed, timing and rate of use, potential impacts on nearby groundwater-dependent resources and wells, water quality requirements, how the water would be used relative to Minnesota's water use priorities, potential for cumulative impacts from other near high-capacity users, if there is any anticipated discharge, and the properties of the discharge. We'd be glad to work with the author on this language. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to testify for or against this bill? Seeing none, then I will close our public testimony and move on to questions from members. Co-Chair Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was glancing through the letters, some from cities and counties, and there was some concern that was raised about the broad language as they describe it in line 1.22, I think. Maybe that could be addressed if Chair Fisher could take a look at that.
Chair Heinzman, on the underlying bill, line 1.22. Section 1, subdivision 5, section 3?
I'm guessing that they were referring to the underlying bill.
Okay.
Maybe the bill author could refer to some of those letters if they had previously risen to the level that they might have been read. But there was a discussion in those letters about the broad language in general, and maybe that can be addressed.
Great. Representative Fisher.
So you're talking lines 1.21 to 1.22. So And this might be just, to me, it seems clear that if there, and it might be, getting some pushback a little bit more to understand specific scenarios. But what this is saying to me is that if there's a project that's coming in that is likely to have large water uses, and I would welcome somebody from the counties or the cities to come up to help me better understand where they're coming from on it, is that even if there's not going to be a decision, is what they're doing is if there's going to be a request that's going to involve large amounts of water that are stated here, that they at least give the heads up to the DNR early in the process, and understanding that sometimes you may have projects that don't go all the way through. The problem is that was mentioned before from the DNR and others, is sometimes you get projects underway and they find out too late in the process, oh, those water volumes aren't available. What we're trying to do is get this whole part of the process to happen earlier. And if there's some things, and I would welcome somebody up to help clarify, I would appreciate it.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record, and if you can address the issue at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Craig Johnson. I'm with the League of Minnesota Cities. We did submit a letter for your packet, and it refers to what would be on the underlying bill, lines 1.21 through 2.2. So it would be subpoint C of the new language created under subdivision 5 of 103G.265. It is the requirement that says any city or county employee must report to the DNR within 10 days and then lists what that is. This applies to every city and county employee, and it does not have a measure of what counts as likely to meet this threshold. If a stormwater person, as I noted in my letter, was at a conference and a vendor booth talked to them about data centers being something that's coming up, do they have to report that now to DNR because a vendor at a conference they went to reported it? If someone calls the city clerk and asks a question about where to site data centers, do they now have to try and get that person's contact information and report it to DNR or be in violation of the law? And how do we train every city employee to know how to measure whether a proposal would meet these criteria or not to be likely to trigger the portions of this law? So our recommendation in the letter was that the proposer should be the one responsible for contacting DNR, not random city staff deciding they think they heard something that might trigger this. It just is too vague, Madam Chair. Thank you, and we are happy to work with the author as this goes forward to try and address that concern.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the committee? Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up, I guess, with a comment, and thank you for the testimony and the letter that was submitted. It does sound, Chair Fisher, like there is more that needs to be done on this if it were to move forward, which that may be a question mark. But there does appear to be some overreach here that needs to be addressed. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to bring that up and talk further on that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members of the committee? If not, Chair Fisher, to your closing.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for the input. Thank you, Chair Heinzman, for raising the one issue a little bit clearer. I'm happy to work with people to get a little bit more clarification and address some of those kind of issues. This is something that I've had some very good input from the DNR. We've got a little bit more work that will continue to happen on these, and I know parts of these also include financial provisions that'll be taken a look at. So looking forward to the continued discussion. Thank you for the time. And with that, I renew my motion that House File 3007 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion in a future bill.
Thank you. Chair Fisher renews his motion for House File 3007 as amended to be laid over, and the bill is laid over.